The rain had been falling for 6 hours, straight when the ambulance doors slammed open and everything inside, Mercy General's emergency room, shifted from urgent to critical. A young woman, barely 23, arrived with vitals that made no sense and symptoms that pointed in 12 different directions at once. Before we continue this incredible story, if you believe in the power of kindness and love stories that remind us what really matters, please subscribe to Kindness True Stories. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us about a time when someone's kindness changed your perspective. Your support helps us share more stories that warm the heart and inspire the soul. 22 doctors rotated through her case over the next 4 hours, each one adding another theory, another test, another reason to wait. And somewhere in the back hallway, a maintenance technician named Nathan Brooks stood with a mop in one hand and a phone pressed to his ear, listening to his 7-year-old daughter ask when he was coming home. He didn't know yet that the answer would depend on whether anyone in that building had the courage to make a decision. The emergency room at Mercy General operated like a machine that night, precise and relentless, each component moving in practice synchronization. Nurses checked monitors every 90 seconds. Residents shuffled between beds with clipboards pressed against their chests. Attending physicians huddled near the central station, their voices low and measured, discussing differential diagnosis with the detached calm of professionals who had seen everything. But beneath that calm, something else was building. The young woman in Bay 7 wasn't responding to any of the standard interventions, and her vitals kept sliding in directions that defied explanation. Dr. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the huddle, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. She had been an emergency physician for 8 years, long enough to recognize the particular tension that filled a room when certainty began to slip away. The patient's name was Sarah Hollister. She had been brought in by her roommate after collapsing in their apartment, and in the 4 hours since her arrival, she had become the subject of intense debate among every specialist. Mercy General could summon. Cardiology suspected an arrhythmia. Neurology wanted to rule out a stroke. Internal medicine was pushing for sepsis protocols. And somewhere in the chaos of competing opinions, the actual treatment had stalled. Emily watched the monitors from across the room. Sarah's blood pressure was holding, but just barely. Her oxygen saturation kept dipping into concerning territory before climbing back up, as if her body couldn't decide whether to fight or surrender. The pattern bothered Emily in a way she couldn't articulate, a persistent itch at the back of her mind that told her something fundamental was being missed. Dr. Richard Vance, the senior attending, called for another round of blood work. It was his third order in 2 hours, and Emily could see the fatigue in his eyes, the weight of indecision bending his shoulders. "We need more data," he announced to the group, his tone leaving no room for argument. But Emily had seen this before. The paralysis of analysis, the refuge of endless tests when the clinical picture screamed for action. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the low murmur. "We've run every test in the book. Her labs are contradictory. Her imaging is clear. What if the data we have is the only data we're going to get?" The huddle went quiet. All eyes turned to her, a mix of surprise and mild annoyance. Vance adjusted his glasses. "Dr. Carter, without a definitive diagnosis, we risk doing more harm than good. This is a complex presentation. It's complex because we're looking at it through 12 different lenses," Emily insisted, her gaze drifting back to Sarah's pale form. "What if it's simple? What if we're missing the forest for all the meticulously catalogued trees?" As she spoke, she noticed Nathan, the maintenance tech, slowly mopping the floor near the bay. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his eyes occasionally flicking toward Sarah with a look of profound empathy. He was a fixture in the ER, a silent witness to 1,000 dramas, always there to clean up the physical aftermath. Emily's mind raced, rewinding through Sarah's scant history. The roommate had mentioned Sarah was a graduate student in botany. She'd been fatigued for days. Then came the dizziness, the nausea, the collapse. Nothing specific, nothing pointing to a classic toxin or common illness, but the pattern of the vitals, that erratic, indecisive wobble in her oxygenation. It whispered something to Emily. It wasn't the steady decline of sepsis or the sharp spike of a cardiac event. It was a struggle, a tug of war. Nathan finished his mopping and paused, leaning on his handle. He wasn't looking at the doctors anymore. He was staring intently at the potted plant on the counter by the nursing station. A lush, green peace lily someone had donated to brighten the place. He then looked at Sarah, his brow furrowed. It was such an odd, focused gesture that it snagged Emily's attention. He caught her looking and quickly averted his eyes, returning to his work. But the seed was planted. Botany graduate student, a plant on the counter, the strange, fluctuating symptoms. A cold, clear realization began to drip into Emily's consciousness. Slow at first, then with the force of the rain outside. She turned to Vance. Has anyone asked about possible toxin exposure? A specific plant toxin? A neurologist, Dr. Ahmed, shook his head. We ran a standard tox screen. It was negative. Standard doesn't cover everything, Emily said, her pulse quickening. What about calcium oxalate crystals? Or something like grey-anotoxin? Vance sighed. That's an obscure avenue, Carter. Based on what? Based on the fact that her body is arguing with itself. Emily's voice rose, drawing stares from nearby nurses. Look at her O2 sats. Up, down, up, down. It's not a system failing. It's a system being interfered with. Some neurotoxins can cause exactly this kind of autonomic instability, mimicking half a dozen other conditions. She pointed toward the nursing station. And she studies plants. The room was skeptical. The suggestion seemed to come from left field, a Hail Mary born of frustration. Vance was about to dismiss it when a soft, hesitant voice spoke from the periphery. The lily. Everyone turned. Nathan Brooks stood there, his mop dripping onto the floor. He looked immediately regretful for speaking, but he didn't back down. The peace lily, it's not just a decoration. It's got calcium oxalate. Makes your mouth burn, swells things up. Could do worse if you ingested enough. 22 highly trained doctors stared at the maintenance technician. The silence was absolute, broken only by the steady beep of Sarah's heart monitor. Nathan swallowed, his knuckles white on the mop handle. My daughter, Chloe. She's 7. Last year, she put a leaf in her mouth. Just a tiny piece. Her mouth blew up. She had trouble breathing for a bit. The ER doc then told me all about it. Said it messes with your nerves, makes everything go haywire. Looks like one thing acts like another. He nodded towards Sarah. Her vitals. They're doing what Chloe's did, just 100 times worse. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. The obscure puzzle piece clicked into place. The roommate said Sarah had been making tea, experimenting with natural blends. What if she'd mistaken a leaf? What if it wasn't a peace lily, but something rarer, more potent? From her own research. We need to treat for plant toxin exposure now. Emily said, her voice urgent and low. Supportive care, IV fluids, maybe even lipids. We're wasting time. Vance looked from Emily to Nathan and back to Sarah. The weight of his position, the fear of a wrong call pressed down on him. To follow the instinct of a mid-level attending and the word of a janitor was a professional risk he had never contemplated. The machine of the ER had stalled. Emily saw the hesitation. She saw the collective doubt in the eyes of her colleagues. The machine was built for data, not for leaps of faith made by outsiders. In that suspended moment, she understood the real emergency wasn't just in Sarah's body. It was in the culture of the hospital itself. Courage wasn't about dramatic procedures. It was about the willingness to be wrong in front of everyone. Order the lipid emulsion, Emily said, not to Vance, but to the charge nurse. And get gastro on standby for activated charcoal now. She wasn't asking. She was deciding. Vance opened his mouth to countermand, but then he looked at Sarah's monitor. Another dip. A deeper one. The oxygen saturation plummeted to 85%. The machine's alarm blared, a sharp, undeniable cry for action. That sound broke the spell. Do it, Vance whispered, then louder. Do what she says. Go! The room exploded into a new kind of motion. Not the slow shuffle of deliberation, but the targeted rush of intervention. Emily directed the team, her orders crisp. As they worked, she glanced at Nathan. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before disappearing back into the hallway. His part played. His daughter, waiting at home for a story about why Daddy was late. The treatment wasn't a magic bullet. Sarah didn't spring back to life, but over the next hour, the wild fluctuations in her vitals began to dampen. The tug-of-war eased. The lipid emulsion, the supportive measures, they were working. By the time a botanist from the university confirmed that Sarah had been working with a rare, hybridized Araceae plant with potent neurotoxic crystals, Sarah was stable, her body finally finding a steady rhythm. The diagnosis was confirmed. The machine of Mercy General had in the end worked. But everyone who was there that night knew the truth. The machine had jammed. It had been silenced by the very expertise designed to run it. The decision that turned the tide hadn't come from a conference of specialists or a definitive lab result. It had come from a pattern recognized by a tired doctor who trusted an itch in her mind, and a truth voiced by a maintenance man who saw a patient not as a puzzle, but as a person echoing his own child's pain. It was a story that would become legend in the halls of Mercy General, told in whispers, the night the janitor diagnosed the patient. But the real lesson was quieter. It was about the silence between the beeps of a monitor and the courage required to listen to the uncredentialed voices that sometimes speak the most vital truths. Nathan Brooks finally clocked out at 3 a.m. The rain had stopped. He drove home under a clear black sky, knowing his daughter was asleep, knowing he would tell her in the morning that sometimes coming home late means someone else gets to go home too. And in Bay 7, as Sarah Hollister rested in a now stable sleep, Dr. Emily Carter looked at the now removed peace lily in the trash and understood that expertise is vital, but observation is human, and in medicine, as in life, you must sometimes have the courage to connect the two, even when the gap between them seems impossibly wide. If you were moved by this story of courage and unexpected wisdom found in the most ordinary places, please show your support for our channel. Like this video to help others find it. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that heroes wear all kinds of uniforms. And subscribe to Kindness True Stories for more powerful narratives that explore the depth of the human spirit. We value your thoughts, so let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in that crowded ER? Your engagement helps us bring more light to stories that matter. Thank you for watching.